Okay, welcome everybody. For those of you that don't know me, I am Sarah Velasquez, the Communications Manager for the K-INBRE, and we have this seminar monthly in February, March, and April, and then September, October, November. Anyway, all of the seminars are recorded and they are put on our website if you would like to watch them again or know of somebody else that would like to watch them. We have 4 guests today, and they all happen to be women, which I think says something, but I'm not sure what it says. So we have 4 guests today. They are going to talk about their experiences just being professors, being researchers, and achieving tenure. So we have Dr. Michelle Pritchard from University of Kansas Medical Center. We have Julie Christensen from KUMC also. We have Melissa Bailey from Emporia State University. And we have Mariah Beck from Wichita State University. So I'm just going to let you guys go ahead and give a little bit of background about yourselves and what you do. And then we will have an opportunity for everybody to kind of ask some questions about how they got to where they are, how they do what they do, and a little bit more information about what it takes to be a professor and a researcher at an educational institution. So Dr. Pritchard, would you like to start?
Sure. So as you just heard, my name is Michelle Pritchard. I'm an associate professor here at the University of Kansas Medical Center. I began my career as a tumor immunologist at Roswell Park Cancer Institute in Buffalo, New York. That's where I received my PhD. From there, I moved to Case Western Reserve University, where I started studying mechanisms that drive alcoholic fatty liver disease. And while a postdoc, I kind of shift my focus away from mechanisms of injury into trying to think more about mechanisms that can help organs repair. Kind of as a corollary to that, I'm very interested in fibrosis, which is a kind of an exaggerated wound healing response. So now in my faculty position, I mainly focus on liver repair, liver fibrosis, and mechanisms of ovarian fibrosis. And the one thing that ties all of that together is my interest in a molecule called hyaluronan, which is an extracellular matrix molecule. I think I'll end there.
Dr. Christensen, would you like to pipe in?
Sure. So I am Julie Christensen. I'm also an associate professor at KUMC. I'm in the anatomy and cell biology department. I'm also the director of graduate studies for our PhD program. And I also have a joint appointment in anesthesiology, where I help develop research projects for our residents. So I actually got my PhD here at KUMC, working with Doug Wright, who everyone here knows, the PI of the K-INBRE grant. So I was studying diabetic neuropathy, and I was always very interested in pain mechanisms. And so I was using this diabetic model in mice to understand more of a loss of sensation that comes from diabetic neuropathy. And then I went to the University of Pittsburgh for a postdoc and got more interested in visceral pain and visceral sensory innervation. And with that, I developed a mouse model of early life injury that manifested a phenotype similar to irritable bowel syndrome. And then I started using early life stress to understand how early life experiences that are negative can impact pain processing later in life. And so I started my faculty position here in 2010, really trying to understand these early life phenomena and how they impact pain signaling through the lifetime. But have recently, well, I guess not terribly recently, but through that time period, started incorporating exercise as a non-pharmacological intervention. And through failed experiments that turn out to be serendipitous, we discovered that our early life stress model actually develops obesity as well. So now we're trying to understand the inflection point between stress, pain, obesity, metabolic syndrome, and how all of these are tied in together. So that's me in a nutshell.
Dr. Beck, would you like to tell us about yourself?
Sure. I'm actually going to start, since I'm talking to undergrads, with my undergraduate experience, because I think that had an impact on my later career. So I was actually a forensic science major at Eastern Kentucky University in the chemistry department. And we were required to do an internship, which I got out of by doing an REU instead. So I did a research experience for undergrads in place of my crime lab internship, because I knew at that point I really didn't want to work in a crime lab. And that was a great experience. I got to work in a structural biology lab, and it was an exciting time period in that lab because we were solving crystal structure, and I actually got to go to the synchrotron in Argonne as an undergrad. And so I think that kind of is what led me to be really excited about protein structure function studies. So I actually graduated and then went back to that same department that I had done an REU at, and worked for a year before I went to graduate school, because it was kind of too late to apply to grad school, but I wanted to make sure that I wanted to go to graduate school. So for you that are thinking about it and you haven't already done a lot of research, or you're not sure or haven't applied to grad school, it's not too late. And everybody said, oh, it would be great to take a year off. So I took that year off and worked, and I did take some courses. Working at a university, you can usually take classes for free. So that was another advantage to taking that year off. And then I applied to graduate schools and ended up going to Washington University in St. Louis, where I got my PhD in biochemistry, but I worked in a microbiology lab. So another thing that I think influenced me a lot was the ability at some of these universities to be in an umbrella program where you can work across disciplines. So I was able to solve an NMR structure of a virulence factor from a pathogenic fungus. So worked between two labs and had to learn to communicate the different ends of that research in both departments. So that was a lot of fun. And then when I graduated, I decided I really wanted to stay with NMR because I had spent a lot of time learning that skill. And so I moved from a microbiology lab into a cancer research lab, studying some proteins that are involved in remodeling of the actin cytoskeleton, and in particular those a class of proteins that are involved, that we think there's a correlation between their expression levels and metastasis of cancer. And so really we know metastasis is what kills when it comes to cancer, and so we really don't understand the processes in place in cells that allow those cells to metastasize, but we think the actin cytoskeleton is a critical promoter of that. And so my lab studies pallidin, that is this upregulated protein in actin cytoskeleton. And then we also study a related protein, myopallidin, which has a role in cardiomyopathies. So we're able to study these proteins in the biochemical context, but then we also have collaborations with cell biologists that allow us to kind of get a handle on both ends of that spectrum, kind of the mechanistic studies and then the cellular studies. So yeah, I'm also an associate professor. I forgot to mention at the beginning. We're going backwards to now. So now I'm an associate professor in a chemistry department, and I have kind of equal duties and time spent in teaching and research, which is much like where I was in undergrad. So I think that early experience at a university that had this kind of research and teaching emphasis kind of influenced where I saw myself being a professor too, instead of at a big medical school where there's much less emphasis on teaching and much more emphasis on the research.
Dr. Bailey?
Okay, well, I'm Melissa Bailey, and I'm an associate professor at ESU. I'm in the Department of Biological Sciences, and I guess my life is more of a story in how you don't shut a door and you keep an open mind, because my undergrad degree is in chemistry. I met my undergraduate research mentor. He was a former forensic scientist at Florida State, and I did research with him, and I wound up getting my master's degree in forensic science from John Jay. And I worked as a toxicologist for the state of Alabama for several years. Decided the crime lab wasn't for me. So Mariah, you were dead on with that decision earlier than I was, and went back to get my PhD. My PhD is actually in developmental toxicology. So my real love is birth defects research. And about 4 years after coming to ESU, I started working on developing the forensic science program. So now I am the director and creator of the Master of Science in Forensic Science program at Emporia State. And now that encompasses, I two-tracked my lab purposely, so I'm not bored, definitely. But I supervise several undergrads working on developmental projects. We are focusing mainly on oxidative stress in pregnancy. We also are starting to look at CBD oil because that's a really up-and-coming, some people call it a cure-all, but we're trying to look at it a little bit more scientifically and then anecdotally. And then I supervise a lot of different master's projects with everything from forensic toxicology to a little bit of crime scene research and things like that. So kind of uses all of my background.
Great. Does anybody have any questions so far for our panel? If you do, remember to unmute your microphone.
Hello, I do have a question. My name is Zoe Wallace, and I am wanting to be a college professor, but I'm also wanting to start a family eventually. So what would be a good timing to do that in between, like, going to school and getting your PhD and then postdoc and actually being a professor?
So I'll ring in as someone who doesn't have a child. So this is, advice from the childless. But we actually had a graduate dean at WashU that said the best time, and I was amazed that he said this, but he actually said the best time to have kids is while you're in graduate school, because you have a much more flexible schedule then in some ways. Don't tell graduate advisors this, no. But, it only gets more, your time gets more complicated, I think, as you move on. So he said this in our introduction to grad school, this is the time to have kids. So that was his advice.
I have one son, he's 9, and I had him about, 2 years after I got to ESU. So he was born in 2010. And I kind of feel like a little bit the opposite. I mean, I felt in graduate school, it was like I had to keep going. And I still felt that way because I was one of the youngest faculty members at ESU, and our department is predominantly men, and then the other women in the department don't have kids. So I felt very much like the weird person that was going to go have a kid. But everybody was so supportive. And I feel like 99.9% of the pressure that I felt was put on by me. And I tell now colleagues that are going to go have kids, I tell them, don't do what I did. Enjoy your baby, because I feel like I didn't do a good job at that, honestly. I feel like now I've realized that, and I take a lot more time with him. And, if I need to leave in the middle of the day to go to a school thing, I know that I'm going to be working that night to make it up. So I don't miss milestones. I try not to miss events, but who knows, maybe there's no good time, but they're definitely worth it if that's something that you want,
Okay, so I have 2 boys. They're 12 and 8. And the first one, the older one, was born when I was a postdoc. So I would have to say I can't imagine having had a child in graduate school, besides the fact that I didn't get married till like the very end of graduate school. Not that you can't, beside that point. But I had my first when I was a postdoc, and that was actually, it was kind of perfect timing because I just submitted a fellowship grant. So I kind of had things that kind of slowed down a little bit, and I could take time to be with him. And so that worked out really well. My second was born about 3 weeks into my faculty, or 3 months into my faculty position, and I don't recommend that at all. That was very difficult. And I really, that maternity leave was not satisfying for anybody because I pretty much worked the whole way through. So some people will say there's I don't think there is a good time ever for anybody, really. But you just, if that's something you want, you just do it. And as you go through and hopefully get, more secure positions, and you get a little more flexible, financial situation, you can, it sounds really bad, but you can get extra sitters and things, because as they get older, they get very, very busy, and you end up just having to hire Uber drivers to drive your children around like I have done. So you just do the best you can with what you have. And if you haven't already, find a partner who will be supportive of your career, because that is the number one thing you can do. If my husband wasn't supportive of me, there's no way I can make this work.
Yeah, I was going to say that too, is even if you don't have kids with someone, having them understand the long hours and the times where you're just emotionally done by the end of the day and you don't even want to talk to people at dinner, that's huge, because I come home sometimes like that.
Well, I'll add just one tiny comment to that. So I don't have children myself, and mostly because those younger years, I didn't have that partner who I thought was going to be really supportive. But thinking back on my career now, if I had had somebody as a graduate student, I definitely would have had kids as a graduate student. My career has gotten exponentially more difficult moving forward. And so I think in retrospect, that's what I would have done.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. That was really great advice. So thank you.
One of the things I wanted for everybody to talk about was the aspect of tenure and achieving tenure. We have professors here from smaller institutions and larger institutions, so I'm curious about what the differences are between achieving those at those institutions. So if anybody wants to kind of talk about their experience a little bit, and I think some of the students here don't really know what is required for achieving tenure, so that might be something we can talk about.
I can jump in as the small school representative at ESU. Our department, I think, has done a great job. We have a pretty clear faculty recognition document, which I would say anybody looking at a faculty position, that's a great question to ask in the interview. When you get there, you know, everybody should get a copy of it when you start. But know what the rules are, because they do vary. They can vary department to department in one school. So with ours, you know, we're a balance of teaching, research, and service. So our teaching evaluations are definitely scrutinized. We're observed yearly before tenure for our teaching. And then we are expected to do research involving students. And I think that's a really big thing with our university, is that you could go out and, you know, have articles published in Nature, but if you just go do that in a vacuum by yourself and you're not involving students, it's not looked on as favorably as maybe lesser things that get published, you know, with student contributions. Presentations at meetings, all of those types of things kind of count, and maybe they count a little bit more at a smaller university than they do at a more research focused one. Service is also a big part. So we are expected kind of 20% of our load-ish is service, and most of us don't have a problem meeting that. So yeah, I would just say the biggest thing is, you know, looking at what the rules are and getting a good mentor. I was fortunate when I got here that I was kind of, you know, told here's a person you can go ask questions to, and they can clarify things. And, you know, my chair has also been wonderful. I'm not sucking up, Tim. You are awesome. And so just having somebody that you can go ask questions to as a young faculty member is crucial.
Can you tell us what you mean by service?
So I serve as I'm on the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee because I do animal research. I serve as the chair of that committee every other year. I've done Faculty Senate. I've done Dean's Advisory Committee. I also service to the profession. I serve as the treasurer for the Developmental Neurotoxicology Society. I've held various positions in that organization. So yeah, service could be department-wide, university-wide, or service to the profession.
Dr. Beck, you look like you're excited to tell us about tenure. Oh, you're muted.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I didn't know if we were contrasting. So I would say, I mean, I don't like the comparison big and small. That might not be the best terms to use, but more research intensive versus teaching intensive universities. So we don't have explicit amounts of grant money that we have to bring in. Some departments do at Wichita State. So in engineering, they have a specific amount of grant funding that they have to bring in from external funds. In my department, it wasn't that explicit. We have PhD and master's students in our department, and you know, you're expected to apply and receive external funds, but there's no specific amount, or you know, you don't have to bring in an R01. There's not that explicit of a requirement, but I think one thing that I liked knowing up front, even when you applied for the job here, that, you know, the split. So here it's 45, 45, 10. So 10 for the service commitments, and then 45 teaching, 45 research. And even though it says that, I think there's a much bigger emphasis here on the research. Even though your time may be spent equally between teaching and research, I think it's much easier to evaluate research output because you have publications, you have conferences, you have funding that you brought in. But teaching is a lot harder to evaluate, and in some ways I think it's also then maybe undervalued even at a school where that is supposedly of equal value. So that was one thing I kind of struggled with. Not that I thought I was doing a bad job teaching, but you just don't know how it's being evaluated exactly, because we have student perception of teaching effectiveness, and you know, you can be a tough teacher for students and get bad evaluations. That doesn't necessarily mean you're a bad teacher. So that was one concern that I had, was a little bit more of a gray area. And then as far as explicit amounts of money, or, you know, what's enough, that's always kind of a struggle as a new faculty member. I mean, you push yourself as hard as you can, do as many, you know, apply for as many grants as you can, but funding rates are really low. And so, you know, I wonder how things are changing over time, because when I was in graduate school, you know, funding rates were much higher. And so the likelihood of getting a grant was much higher. And so now that's shifting a little bit. And so I don't know if universities and the faculty that are evaluating you are from a different time period. When they were going up for tenure, this is the way it was. So that was one concern I also had, you know, and that's something that I think universities are having to deal with. And there's no explicit statement in a tenure document, you know, that you have to have this. But what's nice is you meet every year. At least for us, we turn in annual reviews, and you get feedback every year about what the expectations are and how you've met them or haven't met them. So I think that's nice. I know some schools have like a 3-year review. We do just one every year. There's not one larger one at the 3-year mark. So.
Okay, I'll jump in. So even though I guess within our cohort here, we may be the bigger school, we're still a very small school in the large scheme of things. So at the medical center, it's a little more, I mean, there's a unwritten set of criteria you're supposed to hit, even though everybody says, oh no, it's flexible, but it's what they want you to do. They want you to have R01 level funding, 10 papers, and some teaching, and then some service. And so it's pretty cut and dried. And we don't have, they may have gone to yearly reviews now. I don't know. I went through tenure 2 years ago. And so I had a mid-cycle review, like at that 3-year mark, where I got feedback on where I was doing okay, where I had deficiencies. And they refer to it as hitting mid-career level productivity or success, depending, and they had different criteria for that. So if you are serving on, if you are reviewing papers, that's considered service. If you are on an editorial board, that's even better. If you're serving on study sections, that's fantastic. So it's really hitting like national and then international level of service and recognition for that part. That's kind of what gets you through the process. But it was fairly, I don't know, Michelle can chime in on her experience because we are in different departments, but we were told fairly bluntly what we had to do. And we both did it, so congrats.
Yeah, so I'm about 2 years behind Julie, and everything she said was spot on for my review. I felt that that's what I had to achieve in order to have a reasonably good level of comfort with the success of my promotion and tenure application. But what's interesting to me is an R01 really doesn't do it all. So in an institute that really values bringing NIH dollars in, I know examples of people who have gone up for tenure have not gotten tenure, but they've had R01s. So yeah. that came as a big shock to me, because I thought perhaps those folks could be, if you're stronger with maybe the research side of things, that some of the other things where maybe you weren't as strong, that would all balance out. But it looks like perhaps not in all cases. I agree with some of the other things that have been said regarding how the promotion and tenure committees really need to be thinking not only mission-based to the individual institutions, but also being very realistic with how difficult it is to get RO1 level funding. And I as well grew up in a environment where my graduate lab had NCI funding all the time, and a ton of it. And these were grants that were getting funded at like the 20th or 25th percentile, and that just doesn't happen anymore. So I do think that at least at KUMC that there is some consideration being given to people who excel in other areas, and not just necessarily the research.
Does anybody have any other questions right now for our panel?
I had two questions. My first is what's RO1? And my second is what's the difference between teaching institutions versus research institutions?
Who wants
Okay.
to take that?
Oh, I'll jump in. So an RO1, sorry, I apologize. We like to speak in jargon. So an RO1 is a grant from the National Institutes of Health. It's essentially like the most premier individual grant that a researcher can get. So it will fund your research for 5 years. And it's a mark of prestige, and basically that you've made it in the eyes of the NIH. And it's important to get one. I mean, most people think it's important to get one to fund your research lab. It's even more important to get it renewed. So a lot of the problems will be like you get your first one, they make it kind of easy to get the first one, and they don't make it as easy to get that one renewed or to get a second one. So it's just essentially a research grant. And what was the teaching and research. I don't know. I mean, so I would consider the medical center to be more of a research institute, because we do a small amount of teaching, but everything is going to be team taught. So nobody here is going to have a course that's their own, because we don't have undergraduates on our campus. And we do have graduate students, but even those graduate level courses tend to be team taught, where that if there's so if it's like a developmental neurobiology course, the lectures will be divvied out based on everybody's expertise. So you get the most expert person that's available to lecture on that topic. So not one person is going to be carrying the burden of the whole course, which I think would probably be very different from two of the other panel members here today.
Yeah, so at we're considered more of a teaching institution, although I will kind of echo what Mariah said. Even though your load might say a certain percentage, 50% teaching, 30% research, I think is what it's in our document, but the reality is a little different. I do think our FRC committee values research more, weighs that in a little bit more. In contrast to what Julie was saying, here you definitely develop your own courses. It's all yours. When I was hired to teach specifically anatomy and physiology. That was the foundation course that I was expected to take over and make my own. And then from then on, it was up in the air as to what I wanted to develop. So I started developing embryology, histology, and then the forensic science program, I teach quite a number of courses in that, like pharmacology and toxicology. But yeah, and that's generally how we advertise as well. We'll have a main course that we want someone to cover. Like we just hired a geneticist, and we were looking for someone specifically to do population genetics, and general genetics. And then other than that, we were leaving it up to them in their area of expertise to develop courses.
So yeah, I'll just add, every department, every school have a different teaching load. So, at Wichita State, we teach 2 full courses one semester and then 1 course the next semester. So that makes us more of a teaching institution than the med school, but maybe not as much teaching as a liberal arts college, where they do a heavier load of teaching and only teach undergraduate students. So we have a combination of graduate and undergraduate courses that we'll teach. And then I just wanted to chime in with RO1 is one type of grant from the NIH. There is kind of a parallel pathway for professors at these more teaching focused or primarily undergraduate institutions called an R15. These are all just numbers that they assign. And so that's for enhancing undergraduate research. And so it's kind of the same level of prestige, but for more teaching focused universities. So that would be kind of a parallel.
Hi. So kind of along those lines, I was wondering at primarily undergraduate institutions for tenure, what do they expect you to kind of have achieved in terms of research?
For us, we have to have at least 3 publications. That's a minimum. Two of them can be in regional journals, but obviously the higher up you go, the better it looks. And then at least 1 national, international, all of it peer reviewed. You're kind of expected to take students to conferences. Again, having students on publications is really important for us, and that could be graduate or undergraduate. Since we do have a master's program, a lot of us have graduate students, and then we also have several most of us have several undergrads that work in the lab as well.
So I guess at Wichita State, in my department, we did not have anything explicit and nothing even kind of hinted at about 10 publications or 3 publications. So it was kind of on an individual basis because each field, even within chemistry, is very different. So in organic chemistry, they may publish a 1-page paper in a peer-reviewed good journal, but in biochemistry, it may take us longer to develop a story to get published at that higher level of journal. And so what I liked about the fact that we didn't have explicit goals was that it could accommodate differences in field and differences in the type of science that you're doing. So we were evaluated more on an individual basis, but it makes it gray, right? You don't know exactly what is enough. So that's the bad side to it. But I think we were required to have at least 1 publication a year in a peer-reviewed national journal that involved graduate and or undergraduate students. And then I think the way that it's worded for us is more that you have applied for external funding. I don't think there's a requirement that you bring in, one of these R15 or career grant from NSF. There's no absolute requirement, but they want you to have some external funding.
Yeah, we are not required to have external funding, so that's probably one of the other bigger differences. I'll definitely echo what Mariah said, and that's caused a lot of controversy in our department because there are 2 camps. There's the one side that says we have explicit standards, you know the checklist, you know what you've got to hit, and then the other side that says exactly, even in biology, molecular biology papers might take a whole lot longer to develop than ecology or physiology or something like that. So it has caused problems. It's not a perfect system, and I think there's always those of us, myself included, that think we should revisit things every once in a while.
I think something that we kind of missed that might be kind of important is that how long does it take to get tenure? Some of you talked about 1-year meetings and some of you talked about mid-3-year meetings or whatever, but how long is the process of tenure? Because students might not understand that.
It's 6 years here. And then, you go up in your 6th year, I believe. And we have yearly meetings.
I think that's the same here as well. I think we go up in our 5th year. So by the beginning of your 6th year, you're tenured, if I remember right.
That could be true. I might have forgotten everything.
That's the same here at KUMed. It's a 5-year job interview.
And what it means, a lot of my friends also didn't understand that it's a yes or no. When you go up for tenure, basically, if you don't get tenure, you're fired, right? For the most part. I mean, sometimes they will keep you on as some research professor, but really that's the break point. That means you are hired forever, pending some, really bad behaviors, or you're fired and you have to find another job. So that's what tenure really means. It's not just the guarantee side, it's also the you either have a job or you don't have a job.
And I think too, one thing is that tenure also means due process. So for instance, as a tenured faculty member, if you did do something heinous and, you know, they were thinking about firing you, you are somewhat protected. There's a big process that you go to with that. Pre-tenure, they can actually release you from your contract virtually without telling you why.
At least for us, it's more of a, you have to be, if you're on the tenure track, so there's different tracks here at the medical center. So there's a research track, which you're not guaranteed a position, essentially. You have to keep supporting your own salary. And then they have, for the MDs, there's clinical tracks, and they have all kinds of different flavors of those. But if you're on the tenure track, you have to go up for, you have to be tenured and promoted by the end of your 7th year. So it makes sense that you would go up at the end of your 5th, so that if you are denied, like Mariah was saying, if you're denied, you get another shot. So if you go up the first time and you're denied for any reason, you can try to make amends and fill those gaps that were identified, and then go up again, hopefully successfully, and stay on. I have many colleagues that have done that. So it's really just what you're comfortable with. If you are going to go up at 5 years and you know you're not going to get it, you might delay until that 6th year. And also because I had, even though it wasn't the best timing, having a child while I was still pre-tenure, I got a 1-year extension on my tenure clock. And that's for men and women. So if you have a child, if you adopt a child, regardless of the sex of the parent, you get an extra year added to your clock automatically.
Hello, Sarah?
Yes.
This is Bill Henry in the biology department at Wichita State. What I wanted to comment about this topic is that a number of institutions are actually looking at different criteria for being considered for tenure and promotion. There's a system called Uniscope, and it's something that the administration is asking various departments to look at here at Wichita State. And the idea is to give people credit for doing things out of the traditional teaching, research, and service. It has to do with reaching out to industry, reaching out to the local communities, et cetera. So not everybody is buying into that, but there are some places that are moving forward with that.
And I will say some institutions are actually lengthening the time to tenure. So I know some institutions have gone to 9 years. So like I was saying before, how NIH sometimes makes it a little bit easier to get your first grant and not so much the second or the renewal. They want to make sure that the faculty members they retain are able to get continual funding and not just get that first grant and not get another one. So there are some like what you're saying about Wichita State actually making it easier. Some institutions are going the other direction and making it a lot harder, making that hurdle a lot higher to jump.
I worked at one of those institutes. So Case Western Reserve University was actually the place I had my first faculty position, and I had a 9-year pre-tenure period. Oh, blessing and a curse, you can look at it either way.
I had another question. I know that at some institutions, faculty are on 9-month appointments, and some institutions faculty are full year. I don't know what your situations are, but I don't know if any of you can talk about that and what that means and how that affects your research and teaching. Has anybody been on a 9-month appointment?
Yeah, so at Wichita State, we're on 9 months. So that means we get paid for 9 months of the year from the university. 100% of our salary is paid. We can have that spread out over the whole year. It doesn't mean that we only get paid in those 9 months, but we only get paid for 9 months of work. What that allows you to do is write into grants summer salary to do research. So you can up your salary by getting grants that have that salary written into the grant budget.
we're mostly 9-month here. Administrators, like the department chairs, are 12-month, deans are 12-month, that kind of thing. You could choose to do summer teaching or summer research. I'm on a 10-month contract because of my directorship of the forensic science program. We decided to do it as a 10-month, so essentially I get compensated one more month because of my directorial duties.
We have 12-month appointments. We don't get any time off. Nobody sleeps at the medical center.
We don't get time off either.
Yeah.
That's a myth that everyone.
Yeah, I know.
Any other questions? Can everybody, I know everybody's touched a little bit about your teaching load. Can you talk a little bit about how many classes you teach or expected to teach every semester, or if that changes semester to semester? For example, if you teach more, just do research one semester and teach one semester or something like that. Does everybody talk about that a little bit?
Our normal load is 12 contact hours, and that's a 1.0 load. And we do contact hours, which is nice because that means if you teach a laboratory that meets for 4 hours a week, but it's only worth 2 credit hours, you get credit for the whole 4 hours that you're in the classroom. So that's really nice. I'm on the scale of ridiculous, and so last semester I taught 6 different courses, and this semester I taught 5 different courses. I don't recommend that for anybody. It's kind of a transition period for the forensic science program, and that's why I took that on. And they're not all 3 credit hour courses, but it all takes mental space. So next year I'm looking forward to not doing that ever again.
I think another thing I didn't appreciate, we're, in my department at least, we teach 1 or 2 courses. It doesn't matter how many hours they are. So there's some uneven distribution there. Another thing to consider and think about when you're applying for jobs is how many different preps. So I've taught probably 5 different undergrad courses and 3 different graduate courses. So that means 8 different courses I've had to prep. And so that takes a lot more time than if I only had to teach organic chemistry 1 and 2, right? Every semester, that's all I taught. That would be much different than in biochemistry, because we have a separate major in biochemistry. We have a little bit more coursework, maybe than some of the other disciplines within the chemistry department. So we're spread out a little bit more. And that requires more work, even if it's the same number of classes I'm teaching, if I'm constantly varying what that class is from year to year.
So for us, as I said before, we don't really teach full classes. It's more fitting in where your expertise fits within either the medical school curriculum or the graduate curriculum. So I know for me, my role, we changed the med school curriculum 2 years ago. And so I went from giving lectures and teaching in labs to helping facilitate these small group discussions with the medical students. So it completely changed my interaction with the medical students. I went from having kind of a small touch point with all of them to having more time with just a small group. Jury's still out on which I like better. In the graduate school, as I said, I'm the graduate director, so I have a close advising relationship with all of our graduate students within our program. So I'd say the bulk of our teaching within the PhD programs is going to be involved with mentoring and working with the students one-on-one that are in our labs, working with those that were on their committees that are in the department, and helping just mentor them and teach them and kind of mold them into scientists. And then as well as any graduate teaching that we have as well.
What Julie just described is just about exactly the same situation for myself. Doing a lot of small group facilitation for medical students, although I do some lecture type and flipped classroom exercises with them in addition. And then aside from that, I just wandered all over the university asking people if I could teach in their courses because I found the content interesting. So I teach in cancer biology, I teach in an anatomy course, a histology course, in the anatomy department. And then I do quite a bit of teaching in the toxicology course that we have in our department, as well as another tox-related course here. So I'm kind of all over the place, but I sought out things that at least in the graduate school in particular, that were of interest to me.
I have a question. Can you hear me, Sarah? Everybody?
Yeah.
So I have a question, like basically incorporating undergraduate students into research. So how do you get undergrad students, like say a certain amount of students, they show an interest in doing some kind of research with you. So do they come up with some novel ideas or scenarios and you incorporate those ideas into your research or guide students along what you are actually doing? Because basically with what I'm doing, it was not my PI who was actually doing that particular stuff, but he was working on some novel techniques related to something else. But we as a students, we came up with some novel ideas and thought about using that technology to do something what we wanted. So that's how we incorporated my research. So I just wanted to ask, how do you incorporate undergrad students into your research?
I think I have some of both. So because I have a grant that is focused on undergraduate research, I already have, aims that I have to accomplish. And so I've already kind of thought through the experimental setup. And so I plug students into that. Of course, they always bring their own perspective and ideas, and exact, way to do the procedures are always fine-tuned by them. But then I also have a project in my lab that allows students to kind of explore and develop their own projects. So I like to have kind of both of those pieces, because there's different types of students. Those that want that more directed project where they're working towards this defined goal, and ones that like the more open-ended experiments.
Yeah, definitely you get a variety. There's people that are doing research because they want to look good on a med school application, and then there's ones that, are much more interested in becoming researchers. I'll take anybody, honestly. So, I've had people that came in for one reason and wound up leaving with another. For me, because I work with live animals in my developmental work, I take that extremely seriously. And so it's a little bit of a hierarchy. When they first come in, maybe as sophomores or so, I start them assisting a more senior student. They learn how to handle the animals. And I've had students that never got comfortable dosing an animal. And so they didn't participate as much in some of the direct animal aspects. They might have looked more at the fetal side when you're not handling a live animal anymore. And then I've had others that have just done wonderfully well at that. As they get to be closer to seniors or upper level juniors, we start talking more as peer-to-peer. I'm incorporating some of their ideas into the experiments. If the student wants that, again, like Mariah was saying, some of them love the, here's our goal, here's how we go about that, and they love being part of that process, and that's just what they want from the project.
Well, I wish I had undergrads. That's a huge bummer for me, I have to say. So where was I when I had undergrads? Oh, Case Western Reserve. I postdoc there, and our lab was full of undergrads, and it was so fun. And so all this other time that I've spent in campuses that are largely graduate students or medical students, it's just not the same vibe for me, and I kind of miss it. But one thing that we do is take advantage of summer research programs, and those are largely college students that come into the lab. Although their research experience is kind of shortened to an 8 or 10 week kind of thing, and not quite the nice long from sophomore through senior year of college that we've just heard about. It's still something, and so it kind of gives me that little bit of fun that I really, really miss not having undergrads.
Yeah, my experience has been the same as Michelle's. We do have students, usually through the K-INBRE undergraduate summer research program, come in the summer. Occasionally we will get some that are super gunners from the Lawrence campus and want to drive over, or they're local, and they'll work throughout the school year. So it is kind of a bummer. I did have undergrads that worked for me when I was at Pitt, and that was really nice because they had a neuroscience undergraduate degree, and they would have to do research, and so they would seek out those that were wanting to go to medical school would come over to the medical school campus, which was right next door, and want to work in our labs. And it was fun. It was good, like, learning mentoring experience for me as a postdoc to have undergraduates to work with.
Well, I had one more question, and I think I don't know the experiences of everybody, so I think this is going to be directed at Dr. Beck initially. You just took a sabbatical, correct? So I wanted to know if you could explain what that is and how that works at your institution and what the purpose of that is for.
So at Wichita State, you can go up for sabbatical after you get tenure. I think they are just changing the rules. And I think you can go up for sabbatical every 7 years. So the purpose of it is to allow faculty members to stay in touch with the research side of their work, to go and learn a new technique, or to have time to really devote to writing or developing a grant, collecting preliminary data, or finishing writing up papers that you need to get a good grant score. We have to apply, so we actually have to write up a little proposal describing what we're going to do. A lot of times faculty members will go somewhere for their sabbatical, to a specific lab to learn a specific technique. So that's what I did. I was at the University of Chicago to work in a lab to learn microscopy. So I was never trained as a microscopist, but my research started going in that direction, and so I needed to retool. And so I think that's a common thing that folks will seek out, some new technique that's developed since they were in school. So things have changed, and you have to move with science. And so that was a great opportunity to kind of be a grad student all over again in the lab, and then bring that work back to your own research lab.
For clarification, what does going on sabbatical mean for your position? That you don't teach anymore?
Right. So the logistics are used for us. We can have one semester that we take off, so we're not teaching anymore any during that semester, or you can take a whole year off, but you'll only get paid for half of the year. So if you had grant funding, you could supplement your salary and maybe take that whole year off, but it allows you to ditch teaching for a semester and focus on your research.
Has anybody else taken a sabbatical?
No.
All right, are there any other questions for our panel? We're getting close to the end of our seminar. Anybody else have any last questions? All right, well, I appreciate all four of you participating today. And I learned a lot, and I hope all of our students learned a lot also. And we will put this recording on our website if anybody wants to watch it again later. And if you have any additional questions, you're welcome to talk to your K-INBRE coordinators or contact me. And I guess this is our last seminar for the semester, so everybody have a great summer. And follow us on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and all of our great social media.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Yes,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.